When you're young, the world looks different. Initially, Rose brushed off Carson's betrayal. She hurled objects at him, shattered dishes, but upon deeper reflection, she came to grips with the impossibility of forgiving her beloved. They were merely 20 at the time, full of youthful innocence, utterly unaware of where their lives would lead. No one could foresee that they would tie the knot and share over a decade together. When inquired about Carson's new flame, his mom would roll her eyes and dismiss it as utter nonsense. She firmly believed Rose wasn't fit for her son, a sentiment she echoed throughout their marriage. Her mother-in-law's attitude grated on Rose. Every time Carson's mother planned to visit, Rose tried to make herself scarce to avoid the confrontations. It was incredibly stressful. Post-visit, Carson would be on edge, snapping at Rose intermittently, and after about a week, things would settle down. He would apologize, bring her flowers, and swear that next time, he wouldn't listen to his mother's provocations. Yet the pattern repeated after each visit, and Rose ultimately resigned herself to it. She couldn't sever the bond between her husband and his mother, so she simply waited, hoping her mother-in-law would eventually stop throwing a wrench into their lives. After many years as a wedded couple, Rose had almost pushed aside the memory of Carson's past indiscretion. It had become just another chapter in their personal narrative, a mere footnote in their shared history. Their acquaintances, fully aware of the past drama, would often gesture incredulously towards their heads, but stayed out of the couple's affairs, particularly since Carson had transformed into the model spouse. He was above reproach, shrouded his wife in care, and treated her with kid gloves. During a routine stroll through a mall, Rose was approached by a woman whose face was faintly familiar. It took a moment before she recognized the beaming face as Peyton's, the very person Carson had once been unfaithful with. Peyton engaged in conversation as if the past betrayal had vanished into thin air. Although Rose's discomfort was palpable, yet her civility kept her rooted in the conversation. Peyton shared that she had moved abroad following an invitation from a friend overseas and had only recently returned. "How have you been?" Peyton inquired eventually. "Well," Rose replied with a forced smile. "I just popped into the store to pick up some work shirts for Carson." "You two are still together?" Peyton asked, her surprise seeming somewhat feigned. Rose just nodded. Their conversation wrapped up shortly after, and they went their separate ways. Overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, Rose made her way to the nearest cafe, and sinking into an armchair, she let the tears flow, overwhelmed by the resurgence of a pain she thought she had long forgotten. Carson toiled at the factory, manning the crane as his day job. Grueling and draining as it was, he kept mum about the hardships, driven by the need to provide for his family, especially with plans of welcoming a child soon. During a break one day, his phone buzzed with a flood of notifications from a social media app. A woman seemed to be quite taken with his photos, judging by the flurry of likes. Curiosity piqued. Carson dug around his profile, and to his shock, it was Peyton. A wave of shame washed over him. That old guilt of having let down his beloved resurfaced, just as vividly as it felt years ago. His indiscretion, a reckless act spurred by alcohol, may have seemed trivial to him at the moment. But for Rose, it had felt like her world crumbled. Carson felt genuinely fortunate that Rose had gathered the strength to forgive him, allowing them to build a wonderful family together. Not wanting any ghosts from the past to disturb their peace, Carson decisively hit the block button, erasing Peyton from his digital space. However, just the sight of Carson's former flame had stirred deep-seated grievances in Rose. The resentment, long buried, surfaced with a fresh intensity. One Friday evening, an unexpected message from a friend popped into Rose's inbox, suggesting a night out at the club. Without hesitation, Rose agreed. She felt the need to unwind and clear her mind of the nagging thoughts. Having promptly informed Carson of her plans to relax that evening, Rose dipped home from work to get ready in record time. "Wow, you look absolutely stunning," Carson exclaimed with a smile upon noticing his wife getting ready to head out, already donning her boots. "Thank you, darling," Rose replied, planting a loving kiss on his cheek as they bid each other farewell. As soon as she arrived at the venue, Rose wasted no time in ordering a round of shots and downing them one after the other in quick succession. The alcohol, consumed on an empty stomach, swiftly took effect, clouding her mind just as she desired. Embracing the freedom of movement and thought, she danced the night away, finally able to escape the torment of a long-sanctioned betrayal from years gone by. Amidst the crowd, she caught sight of a figure making his way towards her. Upon closer inspection, Rose recognized him as Miles, a former colleague from her previous job. He showered her with signs of affection, but she promptly deflected his advances, clarifying her commitment to her marriage and her refusal to partake in extramarital affairs. They retreated to a less bustling corner of the bar, seeking a quieter space for conversation. It was only then that Rose realized her friend had gone missing. "I need to find my girlfriend," she murmured, her speech slightly slurred. Miles, ever attentive, prevented Rose from rising from her seat. Gazing upon her former colleague, she beheld him through a completely altered lens. Over the span of 3 years, he had undergone a metamorphosis, embracing a newfound masculinity, evident even beneath his pristine white shirt, wherein his taut muscles lay. Suddenly, a realization dawned upon the woman, as she caught herself unabashedly fixated on her conversational partner. A fleeting thought flickered across her mind. An opportune moment had materialized, presenting itself as the perfect chance to retaliate against her unfaithful husband. Noteworthy, too, was Miles' perceptiveness towards Rose's intense scrutiny. With each passing moment of their exchange, he slowly inched closer until, eventually, his lips daintily grazed hers. "Why don't we venture to a more intimate setting?" he proposed, his voice laced with suggestion. Following a discreet message dispatched to her friend, informing her of her absence from the club, Rose calmly accompanied Miles to his residence. En route, he began to flirt unabashedly, sparking bashful laughter from her lips. Yet beneath the veneer of her amusement, the flame of retaliation continued to blaze unbridled within her consciousness, akin to a guiding beacon. Aware of the implications that spending the night at Miles' abode would inevitably entail, Rose decided against it. Her husband would undoubtedly initiate a search for her, contacting her friend, who, when queried, would deny any knowledge of her whereabouts. Thus, after a couple of hours, swaying still from the effects of intoxication, she dialed a cab, summoning it to transport her homeward. Initially, the intent was not to divulge the events that had transpired to her spouse. Rather, she desired a moment of calm and contentment, earnestly awaiting the opportunity to tally off an act of misdeed akin to his own. One day, Rose couldn't hold back any longer. They were at a restaurant, toasting her husband's modest promotion. After 3 glasses of wine, the words slipped out of her mouth. "I got back at you." "For what?" Carson queried, his curiosity piqued. "For your fling with Peyton," Rose replied, her voice tinged with a mixture of bitterness and satisfaction. Carson froze mid-chew, staring at his wife, trying to comprehend the gravity of her words. How could one exact revenge for infidelity, especially after all these years? "Honey, you're tipsy. Let's call it a night and head home." "You're not making any sense," he murmured softly. "No, I'm perfectly fine," Rose grinned, her smile tinged with intoxication, and recounted her night with Miles. Carson listened in stunned silence, gripping his utensils so tightly his nails dug into his flesh. Initially, he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that Rose could sink so low. "I hear you," he finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "I hope you feel better now." Neither of them broached the subject of divorce. The couple tried to resume their everyday lives without upsetting their routine. They continued working, mingling with friends, even sharing the same bed. Yet, after Rose's startling revelation, a divide emerged between them, and with each passing day, it grew wider and more insurmountable. Their union was clearly troubled. It was noticeable from afar. Both Carson and Rose realized that they were tormenting each other in these broken marital bonds, desperately clinging to what had once been the foundation of their lives. Ultimately, it was Carson who raised the issue of divorce. Surprisingly, Rose felt relieved to hear that. She didn't have the courage to take such a step herself. Together, they sorted out the common property, unloaded the apartment, and went their separate ways. It was hard to come to terms with the end of a 10-year relationship, but it was impossible to continue it. The love that had once bound them had melted away. Everything could have been easier if Rose had realized earlier that she would never be able to close her eyes to betrayal, and broke them off back then. And it would be even better if there was no betrayal at all. But alas, life does not tolerate hypotheses.